look, from my perspective, I know Putin. I actually have sat with him as I'm sitting with you, Nick. And, this is somebody who plays the long game. He plays three-dimensional chess. He's always trying to figure out how to advantage himself, his oligarchic companions, and his country in that order. And so he is very much focused on destabilizing Europe, NATO, the United States, democracies, real democracies. And people have asked me, well, why do you think he did that to you? And, I don't think it's too complicated. I think he had his desire to destabilize us and others. And, he's not exactly fond of strong women. So you add that together, and that's pretty much what it means. Although he did shake hands with me.
And one looks at Russia today, and its economy is facing some real difficulties. There have been protests in, I think, 99 cities around the country. So as you look at Putin's Russia, is there some instability there? And may we, in turn, see democracy, real democracy, return to Russia?
Well, I wouldn't pretend to be an expert on it. I can only tell you my observations, which I came to over my time in public life, both in the 90s as well as, a senator and secretary of state. I think, Russia has every asset that any country could hope for to build a modern economy that will provide broad-based prosperity across that massive country and give opportunities for people to pursue their own dreams as however they define them. And instead, what we've seen is a consolidation of power and a real commitment to shutting the door on freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of thought. And that is to Russia's detriment. So I know that in the recent protests that we have seen, and of course part of why Putin fell out with me was because as Secretary of State, I did say that the parliamentary elections leading up to his return as president were not fair, were marred by all kinds of illegitimate interference. And then there was an outpouring. People went to the streets, and Putin said I'd caused it, which was absurd. It was the unexpressed hope of millions of Russians of all.
Bear with me, guys, here. This is when the feed gets a little glitchy. Let's take you back.
To be part of a positive future, to feel like they had all kinds of options. And, that was displeasing to Putin. And he views the EU, he views NATO as direct threats to his power, which he equates with Russia's power. And in the conversations that I had with him and high-ranking Russian officials, I would just be dumbfounded. I would say, you lose smart, really creative people every single day. They leave for Paris, Berlin, London, Toronto, New York, Silicon Valley. You have the most extraordinary potential. Why don't you let that flourish? And there were never any good answers. And I want the Russian people to know that, we're in their corner. We would love for them to have the same opportunities that we want for our own people. And we hope that someday that will be possible.
This is a women's empowerment conference, so I have to ask, fundamentally, a man who bragged about sexual assault won the election and won 53% of the white women's vote. How is it that in the 21st century, and what does it say about the challenges that one faces in women's empowerment, that in effect misogyny won with a lot of women voters?
Well, I am currently writing a book where I spend, I spend a lot of time wrestling with this. As you might guess, I've thought about it more than once. And I don't know that there is one answer. Let's be clear. I think in any campaign, there's so many different cross currents and events, and some have greater impact than others. But it is fair to say, as you just did, Nick, that certainly misogyny played a role. I mean, that just has to be admitted. And why and what the underlying reasons were is what I'm trying to parse out myself. I would just say this. There is a constant struggle, and not just women and men, in a time of rapid change like the one we are living through, between something that is different, that may hold out even possible positive consequences, and something that is familiar, and something that really is first and foremost about security of what you have right now. And I think in this election there was a very real struggle between what is viewed as change that is welcomed and exciting to so many Americans, and change which is worrisome and threatening to so many others. And you layer on the first woman president over that, and I think some people, women included, had real problems. Now, it's fair to say that, President Obama, my husband, they also really struggled for white votes, for as many as they could get. So we have to do a better job in speaking to and with people who are on the downside of the change equation and wondering what do we have to offer and why should they vote for us, as opposed to, well, I don't agree with him, not sure I really approve of him, but he looks like somebody who's been a president before. So why do I want to add more change or more potential anxiety to my life? We're just going to go and hope he does a little bit of what he says. And I think that's where a lot of people are.
On this theme of misogyny in elections, one of the most common questions that I got when I asked followers was from an enormous number of young women who frankly were galvanized by your loss in a way that they had not been galvanized by your campaign. And they want to go out and change the world. Right. In many cases by public service. But they're anxious about the nastiness of being in public life, especially for women. And in some cases, I think they're concerned about the research that some social scientists have pointed to, that women can be perceived as either likable or as competent leaders, but not as both.
Yes. Well, that is part of what I meant earlier about the change. And let me just address that, because I'm going to spend a lot of my time encouraging young people, particularly young women, to go into politics, to go into public service, because I believe that not only is it a worthy and very satisfying way to contribute, make a living, learn more, but we really need you. And we need more young people, and we particularly need more young women. So I'm going to work with some of the organizations that are springing up. I'm going to work with those that have been around for a while to see how I can reach out, recruit, help train, mentor, advise people to do this. However, having said that, probably one of the first things I would say to them, as I would say to this great conference, be ready. it is not a new phenomenon, but it feels new and painful every time it happens to you. And so one of my favorite Americans, Eleanor Roosevelt, said, good grief, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, 70 years ago now, more than that every woman who enters the public arena needs to grow skin as thick as the hide of a rhinoceros. And boy, do I relate to that. Because the research you just referred to, Nick, and Sheryl Sandberg wrote about this in her last book, Lean In, but many, many academics have written about it. And it's a pretty simple but unfortunate phenomenon. With men, success and ambition are correlated with likability. So the more successful a man is, the more likable he becomes. With a woman, guess what? It's the exact opposite. So the more successful and therefore ambitious a woman is, the less likable she becomes. That's the inverse correlation that lies at the heart of a lot of the attacks and the misogyny, and it's unconscious. It's not like people, say to themselves, well, she's ambitious, she's successful, therefore I don't like her anymore. But the way our politics is structured and high-level public positions, that seems to be sort of baked into the reality. So when I think about, I left the State Department as Secretary of State. I had like a 65% approval rating. People thought I had really done a good job, which I was, very touched by. And it was a job that I was asked to do by a man, President Obama, right? So I did it to the best of my ability and came out, and some people said at the time, the most popular public official or high-profile public person in politics in the country. Well, what happened? Oh my gosh, by the time they finished with me, I was Typhoid Mary. And poor Mary, she didn't deserve it either when you go back and look at the history. So what happened? Well, I said, I think I could be a really good president for our country at this point in our history, and I think I will run for president. And so from that moment, all of a sudden, from that high point of being the Secretary of State of the United States of America, I became a candidate seeking the highest office in the land and asking people to support me. And even people who had supported me in the media during my time as Secretary of State or even as Senator, all of a sudden it's like, who is she? What does she want? I always feel like I'm, in Waiting for Godot. I've been around, and some people say too long, and other people say, well, we don't know her. I have a pretty long record of who I am and what I stand for and what I've done, but it really did verify, unfortunately, that research. So I guess the final thing is, I want you to be involved. I am thrilled by all the activity that's going on, recruiting young people to run, showing up at town halls, making tens of thousands of phone calls that help derail that terrible health care bill that the House Republicans are working on. But toughen up your skin. Take criticism seriously, but not personally. In other words, look, I am not perfect. Everybody knows that by now. So I am always open to people saying, well, you should have done that. Or you could. Sometimes I don't quite know how to fix what they're concerned about, but I try. And so I take it seriously, but I don't any longer, and haven't for a long time, take it personally. Because part of the attacks, the personal attacks, part of the bullying, part of the name calling that has certainly become much more pervasive because of the internet, is to crush your spirit, to make you feel inadequate, to make you doubt yourself. And I just refused to do that, and that infuriated them even more.
I believe that your staff conducted some autopsies of the election, and I'm looking for lessons learned. And in particular, I mean, to what extent do you assign blame to Bernie Sanders, to the media for focusing on emails?
How much time do we have?
To President Obama for not raising the issue of the Russia ties more, or to yourself?
Well, you'll have to interview me after my book comes out, because, seriously, this is a very fair question. And we have spent a lot of time, we, the proverbial, multitudinous we, both people who worked on the campaign, people who were interested observers, and others, trying to sort of piece it all together. And there are lots of contributing factors, as there would be to any big enterprise like this. I mean, I basically started a $1 billion startup and ran it for 18 months. And so there are things we certainly could have done better. There are things I certainly could have done better. But I think it is fair to say that the outside intervention, the combination of the Comey letter on October 28th, WikiLeaks, which played a much bigger role than I think many people understand yet, had the determinative effect. Nate Silver, whom you know well, and who was much more cautious throughout the election, saying, well, this could happen, still thought I was going to win. And his autopsy was, but for the Comey letter on October 28th, I would have won. And so I think there are credible outside voices that I'm also trying to, bring together and analyze, because for people who read my book, who are interested in this, the nearly 66 million people who voted for me, I want to give as clear and as credible an explanation of these factors as I can. So I don't want to short circuit it now, but certainly I and everybody around, we've gone over and over and over and have learned some lessons. And I think that gets me back to sort of Russia, in the sense that one of the lessons I think we've learned is that since they were successful in influencing voters, it's different from, the interference with the actual voting machines. And for a while there was a confusion about that. A lot of people said, well, can you prove that people interfere with the machines? That's something, put that to one side. Although, there are people who pursue that, but put that to one side. It was really the weaponization of information, something that Putin has used inside Russia, outside Russia, to great effect, that we didn't, and I'll say this for myself, I didn't fully understand how impactful that was. And so it created doubts in people. But then the Comey letter, coming as it did just 10 days before the election, really raised serious questions in a lot of people that I think were obviously unfounded, but nevertheless happened. So I think there's a combination. So we've got to be really clear, Democrats, Republicans, whatever, what was done in that election, what was unprecedented, and be willing to say we can't let that happen again. Look, I don't want any Republican candidate to be subjected to what I was subjected to. I don't want anybody running campaigns or the Republican Party to have their communications stolen, which is what it was. It was a theft. It was a more effective theft even than Watergate back in the day. So I want people to say, hey, we should have tough, really aggressive campaigning that goes with the territory, but we aren't going to let somebody sitting in the Kremlin with 1,000 agents, with bots and trolls and everybody else trying to mix up in our election. We've got to end that, and we need to make sure that's a bipartisan American commitment.
You've been through some presidential transitions, 1993, 2009. So I'm curious what you make of President Trump's first 100 days. And in particular, one of the themes has been the global gag rule, cutting off funds for the UN Population Fund, an effort to defund Planned Parenthood.
Right.
And, you know, these extraordinary scenes of a bunch of men sitting around discussing women's health.
Right.
What is your take on the administration so far, and in particular, what this means to women here and around the world?
Well, first let me say that, I don't take any pleasure in seeing the kind of chaotic functioning.
Just a little bit of Schadenfreude, just a little bit?
No, and here's why, Nick. I mean, look, I thought I was going to win, and I had a really good transition operation going because I understood. You remember that point in the debate, one of the debates, when my opponent was ridiculing me yet again for having prepared for the debate. And I said, yes, I did prepare for the debate, and I'll tell you something else I prepared for, being president. So I felt like I felt like, you know, I would have, look, it's the hardest job you can imagine. And I thought we would have been prepared. We would have been ready to move on a range of fronts. We had worked so hard on policies, even lining up, you know, personnel and the like. So clearly that wasn't well prepared for the incoming administration. And I think they are going through some very public growing pains. But here's what I don't understand. I don't understand the commitment to hurt so many people that this administration, this White House, seems to be pursuing. You know, there are so many examples in just the first 100 days. The ban on people coming into our country. And yes, it was aimed at originally 7, now 6 countries, but it really sent a chilling effect across the world, and not just to Muslims, to all kinds of people who are saying to themselves, wait a minute, what happened? Don't you still have Lady Liberty in the New York Harbor? Aren't we still the land of, you know, opportunity and freedom? So it had a terrible impact. And then, of course, what they did or tried to do to the health care bill, which I will confess to this. Having listened to them talk about, you know, repeal and replace for 8 years or 7 years now, and they had not a clue what that meant. They had no idea. I don't know that any of them had ever even read the bill, read the law, understood how it worked. It was so obvious, and you know, health care is complicated, right? And so they're like, they don't know what to do. And yeah, I do admit that was somewhat gratifying as they, you know, were going back and forth. But the targeting of women, which is what's going on, is absolutely beyond any political agenda. There's something else happening here. So the global gag rule, you know, that bounces back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. But the way they wrote it this time, not like Bush did, not like Reagan did, this time would be to remove all aid if there is some kind of alleged breach because you provide, family planning services, but somebody says to a woman desperate to, get an abortion because she's been told she'll die if she tries to bear another child, and so you try to help her, well, you then lose everything, not just a little bit, but all of it. So then that you follow up that with the UN Population Fund, which I have seen, and you've seen, because you've traveled extensively, the impact that those dollars have in saving women's and children's lives, in helping women have a better shot at a future because maybe she can get contraception and not had her first child at 14 and has had 6 or 7, now she's 27 and she's desperately trying to prevent another pregnancy and she needs it. This is not just the right and moral position for the United States to take. This is in our national security interests. The more we support women, the more we support democracy, the more we backhand terrorism and fundamentalism that can creep into countries. So women's issues are national security issues around the world. And then the final thing, which you mentioned, the things that come out of some of these men's mouths, like, why do we have to cover maternity care? Oh, I don't know. Maybe you were dropped by immaculate conception. Who knows? I don't know. and and then you're right. I mean, the classic picture of all of the men sitting around the table deciding how they were going to defund Planned Parenthood, end maternity care, end, access to insurance for family planning, for contraception. Looking at that picture, you just think it's got to be from a skit on Saturday Night Live. I mean, it can't possibly be true. My favorite GIF on the internet was showing the dog sitting around the table, and the caption was, "Now we will discuss feline health."
Let me ask you about Syria.
Oh, good. Okay.
This week we've seen these extraordinary images from Syria, children dying in a gas attack. And your husband had said that his worst foreign policy mistake as president was not acting more in Rwanda. In his defense, he only had 100 days. We've had a half dozen years in Syria as 300,000 people have been killed. Was that President Obama's worst foreign policy mistake? And I know that you were an advocate with Dave Petraeus of being more aggressive, but in retrospect, do you think that for you also that was maybe your gravest foreign policy mistake as Secretary of State?
Well, you're right. When I was Secretary of State, I teamed up with Dave Petraeus, then Director of the CIA, Leon Panetta, then Secretary of Defense, to present a plan for us to move more aggressively to support protesters, to try to provide some backup in what was, I thought, likely to turn out to be a very one-sided battle. This was before ISIS really came to public awareness with their plan for a caliphate, and they're setting up headquarters in Raqqa. And I believed then, I've said this repeatedly, that I thought we should have done more at that point. Now, I'm the first to say that these are not easy decisions. That's why you want to get the best information you can from the best advisors you can, and to really drill down into this, whatever the situation is. I then, I left the government, and I then did did promote a no-fly zone. And I still believe we should have done a no-fly zone. I think we should have been more willing to confront Assad, because remember, the Russians didn't get in at first. And the Iranian help was pretty much on the ground with the so-called, Revolutionary Guard, Quds Force. And they were, enlisting Hezbollah units to fight on the ground because there was a real fight going on. But Assad had an air force, and that air force is the cause of most of the civilian deaths, as we have seen over the years and as we saw again in the last few days. And I really believe that we should have and still should take out his airfields and prevent him from being able to use them to bomb innocent people and drop sarin gas on them. So, I wish, obviously, I wish that the international community writ large had been able to rein this in. I spent a lot of time with the Russians, with the Arab states, the Gulf states, and I actually had worked out an agreement for a transition in June of 2012 in Geneva, and we had hammered it out all day long. The Russian Foreign Minister, Lavrov, actually agreed to it, and it was calling for a technocratic government and, in effect, for the easing out of Assad. And I know that he left our meeting. I know he went to his embassy. I know that he asked, for guidance, and he came back and agreed. So it lasted about 24 hours because basically Assad said, I'm not going anywhere. And part of the reason Assad has been so dug in is because some of you who follow Syria know Syrian history. His father destroyed a city that was a hotbed of opposition to his rule. And I mean, literally massacred more than 10,000 people and almost seeded the ground so that nothing would ever grow there again. Very dramatic, but that was the impact it was meant to have. And so the people around Assad, who was never the person that was expected to succeed his father, that was an older brother who, was viewed as a much tougher character. Bashar was off in London practicing ophthalmology, and so his brother gets killed in a car wreck. He gets summoned home, and he basically is given the responsibility of becoming the dictator of Syria. So why do I tell you all this? Because it matters if you know a little bit more about what is going on in the minds of those who are your adversaries. He is absolutely a prisoner of his family's expectations, his dead father's looming presence, and his delusion that I believe he now probably could pass a lie detector about, that everybody who opposes him is a terrorist. That's how Putin thinks, and Putin has basically, weighed in, particularly with air power, to support this fight to the death policy that Assad has. And I think that we've got to try to change the dynamic. And all through the campaign, I would say I'm for a no-fly zone. And immediately, whether it was in the primary or in the general election, I'd be asked, well, no, aren't you afraid of the Russians? It's time the Russians were afraid of us, because we were going to stand up for the rights, the human rights, the dignity, and the future of the Syrian people. And I actually had a lot of confidence that I could say to Putin and his team, look, you're either with us or against us on this no-fly zone. Here's what we're going to do. We don't want any confrontation with you, but we cannot let this massacre continue and the consequences that are affecting the entire region. So I feel pretty strongly about where we are now and what happened in these last days with neurotoxin, probably sarin gas, is just... Let me say one more thing about this, because there will be people who say, well, it's not our fight. We don't care. What difference does it make? We're not involved. First of all, we are in an interconnected, interdependent world, unlike any we've been in history before, because of mobility, because of communications. And so what happens in other places can very much have an impact on you. But the world took a position. The world took a position after the First World War, whose 100th anniversary of starting we will be celebrating, or commemorating, not celebrating. And we took a stand against the use of chemical weapons. We have a whole unit attached to the United Nations that is devoted to trying to prevent chemical weapons from falling into the wrong hands, from being used. It is important that we take a strong stand against chemical weapons, and we thought, with the deal that the Obama administration negotiated, that we'd gotten rid of, their stocks, but who knows whether they'd hidden some or whether they bought more. We don't know. We just know the impact. And so it is in our interest. We've got to start, once again, recognizing norms of behavior in our own country and globally are just as important to keeping peace and preventing atrocities as any law that is written down. People have to know that they will be held accountable as war criminals, as committing crimes against humanity, if they engage in these kinds of aggressive, violent acts.
We are about out of time, but let me ask just one last question about your future. So, aside from the book, will you run for office again? Will you ever be Mayor Clinton? The UNICEF executive directorship comes up. Would you?
Nick, the short answer is I am really focused on, just doing some things that I think I can help make a difference with, like the supporting of young people and getting more women into politics. And I very much want to help Democrats take back the Congress. And I have no plans. I have no plans at all other than, trying to find some interesting things to do, trying to support other people, to pursue their interests, spend time with my grandchildren, which is a great joy. So, I'm not making any plans to do anything.
That does not sound like a very definitive refusal ever to think again in public office. I am looking at doing interesting things. I don't think that will include ever running for office again. As interesting as I find that to be, because I think you can have a big influence. But I think there are lots of ways to make a difference, to work in, all sectors of our society, the for-profit, the not-for-profit, looking for ways that you can help people live their own lives better, tell their own stories better. And I've always been really focused on kids, and I want to find some good ways to help organizations that are helping particularly kids that face difficulties in their lives. And I am passionate about the unfinished business of the 21st century, the rights and opportunities for women and girls. So I think there's a lot to do. Well, thank you for this first interview since the election. Thank you for modeling a lifetime of public service. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yay, there you are, my dear.
Fantastic. On fire. It was really great. Thank you, Nick. Thank you so much. Wow. Well. So, I want to thank so much
Secretary Clinton, not just for tonight, and for giving women in the world the great honor of her first real interview. But I want to just thank her for her many decades of service to this country, for everything she's done for America. And yes, 68 million people did vote for you, Hillary. And, your voice, your brilliant mind, your amazing voice, your incredible patriotism need to still be out there big time, because we need your leadership, we need your voice still. It's always going to be important. Really. And thank you so much, Nick Kristof, for your wisdom and your rigor and the brilliant columns that you write, which, keep the conscience of the world alive. And thanks to all of you and Women in the World for coming today, and to all the incredible, amazing participants we've had today. My God, the stage was on fire. So thank you all so much. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, day 3 begins. Yay. And thank you. Oh my God, so good.
All right, everybody, that was Hillary Clinton speaking at the Women in the World Summit. She spoke along with Scarlett Johansson, who also spoke there. This took place earlier today in New York City, everybody. Speaking on what women can do in the future, and also she was asked, will she run again? Now, she didn't give a definite answer, but she did say there's lots of ways to make a difference. She wants to continue helping children and girls and women